No mai haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Glory of Our Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups.
Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Hi, welcome to Cult Chat. Today I'm in the studio with Liz and Lindy, and we've got another exciting episode for you today. We're doing our first of 2 episodes about how to relate to people who are inside a cult when you're not in the cult. Today, the first of these 2 episodes is going to be about talking to a wonderful person called Renee Spencer, who's a mother who lost her daughter to a cult, whose daughter is still inside that cult. After this episode, we'll be having another conversation about relating to people when you're outside the cult, when you were once inside the cult. So from now, I want to take us to the interview that Lindy did with Renee Spencer. And how about you sit back and listen to that, and we'll be back with you after to have our own conversation about that.
Welcome to Cult Chat. Today, we've got a very special guest with us. Renee, we're so glad to have you with us, even though it's such a hard topic that we're going to be talking about today. So for our viewers and listeners, Renee is the parent of a young person who has been recruited into a cult-like group. Renee is going to talk to us today about what it's like to be not someone who's leaving a high-demand religious group or a cult-like group, but what it's like to be a parent or a loved one who's on the outside but who cares deeply about and is very concerned about somebody who has been recruited or joined a cult-like group. Renee is from Victoria in Australia and is also a teacher and a mental health practitioner as well as a parent. You can look her up and find out other work that she's been doing, including a rubric she's developed for assessing coercive control in groups. We will share more of the links to that in our notes at the end of the podcast. But today, Renee, the focus on what we're going to be talking about with you is just hearing about what it's like to be the parent of somebody recruited into a high-demand or cult-like group, and what the misconceptions are, what the do's and don'ts are. So, Renee, over to you. What can you tell us?
Oh, thank you, Lindy. That was a wonderful introduction. So with my story, I like to start with just dismissing some of the misconceptions about parents and the sort of environment that people who join cults may have come from. There are assumptions along the lines of my daughter must have come from a bad family. She must have had a bad relationship with her family, those sorts of things, to which I can absolutely say that is not the case. I always considered my daughter and I to be very close, not necessarily, living out of each other's pockets or anything like that. But we were living in 2 different states, and she would text me nearly every day and would share things. And we had our tiffs every now and then, as all mother-daughters do. But generally speaking, we had a really good relationship. And then when everything just went silent, it was a real shock. When there was just no communication, it was, didn't know what to make of that. Before I go into that, though, just there's been other misconceptions too. Like there are misconceptions surrounding people who join cults. They must have a mental illness. They must be stupid. They must be
Mm.
weak. All of those things. And it's like, no, my
Yeah,
daughter was a strong, intelligent, gifted young woman. And
that's really interesting, and I totally support what you're saying. There is a misconception. You're right that often people think that someone who joins a cult must have been, yeah, stupid or lacking in intelligence somehow. And yet I must say that time and time again, the people who I meet who were adult or young adult recruits, time and time again, the standout characteristic of them that I see is that they were beautifully idealistic
Mhm.
and passionate people. And it was actually that characteristic that drew them in because they were the sort of person who did want to strive
Mm.
for a better life or to strive to change the world, and a person who wasn't afraid to sacrifice to meet their goals. And those are all really beautiful attributes that culty leaders just absolutely seize and take advantage of. So it
Mhm.
sounds like your daughter also was like that.
Absolutely. She was very idealistic. She cares about the environment. She's got a lot of compassion. And I didn't raise her to be Christian, but she chose that as an adult, and like all her life choices, I fully supported her exploration of her own spirituality. And she was just trying to really live out her own personal values. I think probably something that happened with her, which doesn't necessarily happen to everyone who joins a cult, is the first contact she had with the group, she met a man who she basically fell in love with.
Oh,
And because she's such a sincere person, I've always understood, no, she really, really fell in love. And she was
mm,
22 years old. And I remember what it was like to be in love at that age.
mm,
You don't think that anything could ever possibly go wrong.
mm,
And I don't think she fully knew what she was getting into.
mm,
And to the extent where she didn't know the group's history, she didn't know all their controversial past and things like that.
mm.
But they just pulled her in so quickly that she didn't have a chance to really step back. So the time difference between her joining and marrying this person who she'd just fallen in love with was like 2 or 3 months.
Wow. Wow. And this was from just to clarify as well, this was in Australia, like ordinary kind of
This,
suburban setting, you know,
yeah,
she
yeah.
hadn't
So
gone
this is
traveling and jumped into a commune somewhere and
that's it. Yeah, she was living in Victoria. I was living in another part of Australia at the time.
mm,
She was living in Victoria, and the group just happened to be in Victoria at that point in time too. She'd watched some of their videos online,
mm,
and she sent an email to them. So that's what triggered them to coming out to meet her in person. And that's where she fell in love. And she was 22. So she was just at that point in her life where she wasn't entirely sure what she wanted to do or what direction she wanted to go in. She, like a lot of young people, she'd spent a few years traveling and just working out which direction. And she had actually made a few steps in working out what she wanted to do.
mm.
But then the group just sort of came along and said, you can just live your life being a Christian your whole life and doing all of these wonderful things. And so she's like, this looks great. I think this is what I want to do. And I love this man. And yeah, with absolutely no ability to actually question it. And as soon as she joined, as soon as that process started, she was told not to tell her family what was going on.
Wow.
There was this
Okay.
deliberate, don't tell your family.
Okay, yeah, so the kind of deceit or the hiding begins. And so for
Mm.
you as a parent on the outside, how long did it take you to notice that something was up?
Look, I didn't actually know the name of the group and their history for
Mm,
almost 2 years myself.
mm,
I just sort of supported. I thought I saw what my daughter was doing. I'm like, you're obviously in love. There's nothing I can do to stop you. This on the outside looks like it's just a peaceful hippie Christian group. And
right.
so I just went along with it. And I was sort of watching, and I'd see her every now and then. It wasn't immediately that we're cut off, and I was just maintained a very supportive approach.
Mm.
I did immediately suspect that she'd joined a cult, and I jumped online and I'd actually Googled, what do you do when your kid
Yeah.
joins a cult? And all the advice that you get when you do that is don't criticize the group and just maintain contact. So I did that. I didn't fully understand the group dynamics.
Yeah.
And I've since sort of come to realize that they're not all groups are equal. And if for some groups, that approach of just maintaining contact and being supportive, that's all you need to do.
Mm.
And if I was to jump ahead way a few more years, once I actually found out what this group was like, every time I found out something new, it was like, oh my goodness, oh, they're doing this. It's just as soon as I thought I could not be shocked anymore by some of the behaviors of the group, I would just learn something new, and I was just shocked again to a point where there's no real competition in which cult's worse, but there are some cults
Yeah.
that are worse.
Yeah.
And I don't even think when I first realized she was in a cult that I realized just how bad this particular group was.
Yeah, I think there's a part of us that wants to believe that the really wacky, crazy cults are all in the past.
Mhm.
That it was, the Jim Jones one, or it happens in other countries, but yeah, not in civilized suburbia of towns in Australasia. It's I can imagine, I can fully empathize why at first you did not even dare to think of how bad maybe this particular group was. But tell us a quick overview of this group, because this group has been publicly named. You've shared publicly about it before as a group. There's a number of allegations and controversies and concerns about it. So yeah, I don't want to give them much airtime, but a quick overview, their name.
Okay, so in the media, they are known as the kidney cult. They go by the name of Jesus Christians. And they've got the name the kidney cult, though, because the leader encourages the members to donate a kidney to a stranger. And this is meant to be an act of love. Of course, there is a lot of speculation that there is a lot of coercion going on around these donations. And people like myself, I've got to be careful with my language here, I suspect that even though they are not being openly paid for these kidney donations, I think if you're a recipient of one of these kidney donations, then you would probably want to voluntarily give a donation to the group. But of course, that whole part of the finances has not been investigated by, no. So a lot of us, we have a lot of speculation. And when you look at some of the documentaries and some of the reports around the kidney donations, there is certainly signs of coercion there.
Wow, that's incredibly terrifying. Yeah, that's incredibly terrifying. And so, jumping back to this is, yeah, there's a lot of things that can be a parent's worst nightmare when you're raising young people, but this really is super terrifying to have your child or your young person join a group. And I guess one of the challenges of being a parent is constantly trying to find a balance between, as you've said, encouraging your child to, differentiate and find their own voice and make their own choices, and wanting to be supportive and empowering as a parent. And yet, at the same time, when you see them making choices where there's real genuine concern about the outcome of those choices, then you don't want to just sit on your hands and say, oh, let them experiment, because you've got very, very real concerns about the outcomes of what they're doing. What's it like trying to walk that path? I imagine for you, as the journey's unfolded, that there's been a constant wrestling between those two things for you. Can you tell us a little bit about how hard that is?
Look, it's been really, really hard. And the standard advice of parents just not rocking the boat and not saying anything bad about the group, there is a lot of good in that. And things really turned pear-shaped when it did get to a point where I did actually have to say something to my daughter, when I did find out their real name, when I did find out of their past, and I had to sort of say, you've got to watch out. This is not a good group. She didn't want to hear it because it's just like someone in a domestic violence relationship. If you sort of say to them, hey, look, you know what your partner's doing when you're not looking, and they don't want to see it, it was like that. She wasn't at a place where she was ready to see all of those sort of dynamics. And I think I did actually help her question things a little bit. But then what the leader did, because he knew that I'd questioned her, he sent her overseas
Oh
because
gosh, yeah.
that's one of his tricks. So a lot of the things in his particular group of behaviors is he sends members overseas, or at least to another part of the same country. So in Australia, we've got a big lots of space where you can go, right, go to another state. He um, keeps tabs on all communication with family members. So all the emails I was sending to her were getting read by the leadership. The emails that she was sending back to me were being edited by the leadership before they came to me. And like, this is one of the things that sort of made me want to start asking questions, because I started realizing this is what was going on. And so here I am trying to actually still have a relationship with my daughter, but that relationship, literally, you've got the cult in the middle. There was
Yeah.
never any point in time where I could actually go, hey, let's have a phone call, or she could go away and say, I'm going to call mum, without someone else being there watching. Never a time we could just be like, hey, let's go for a coffee, let's hang out. Everything was always controlled by the group.
Yeah, that's incredibly controlling. And you've got your information control there, as well as your relational control, as well as your
Mhm.
physical location control. That's incredibly challenging. And just to jump back to you saying that often the advice is don't rock the boat, and don't say anything critical of the
Mhm.
group. So just to reiterate for any of our listeners who might not have joined the dots there, but the purpose of that, to my understanding, is to try your best to maintain relationship with the
Mhm.
person, right? So like a lot of the advice is usually around, yeah, doing everything you can to keep those pathways open and to keep some level of communication and trust between the parents or loved ones on the outside and the recruit. But yeah, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that even that there, the relationship was already being quite severely meddled with, and that you weren't even able to have direct communication with your daughter
Yeah.
already, and that
No,
then they moved swiftly to cutting that off.
they moved very swiftly to cut that off. And this particular group has a doctrine. They have two doctrines which are very damaging. One of them is what they call the forsaking all. So they're told to forsake their possessions first, and then forsake their families, and they keep on going through. You're meant to forsake your identity. This man is literally grooming people to forsake their lives, which is absolutely terrifying.
That is terrifying. And I mean, I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian group, so I know the scriptures pretty well. And I can imagine he's calling on some of the teachings of
Mhm.
Jesus or stories in the Bible and taking
Yeah.
them out of context, or giving them like a very extreme application instead of maybe a metaphorical application that was intended.
Mm.
Yeah, because there are scriptures about leaving your father and mother and that sort of thing. And I imagine this person's drawing on those things to help sever the family bond.
Oh, he is, absolutely. And I think, like a lot of cult members, what he'll do, well, Christian cult members, I should say, is he will choose to interpret the Bible literally when it suits him, and then it'll suddenly be metaphorical when it doesn't suit him.
Mhm.
And at the same time, like there's been a general consensus for hundreds, if not thousands of years, that some of these Bible verses are definitely only metaphorical. But he's like, no, no one's understood it before. See, you actually meant to hate your parents. No, literally hate your parents. And
Oh my gosh, Renee, that's just heartbreaking. Yeah, I
see, I never stood a chance. There was in my particular circumstances, there was absolutely no chance. And a lot of other groups, they'll even try to get their members to recruit their family members.
Yeah.
But
Whereas this group's actually, it sounds like they've gone straight for the jugular kind of
yep,
of the family bond. There hasn't
yep,
been any dilly-dallying, like to actually have doctrine and teaching explicitly around severing and forsaking the family bond. That's just, yeah, that's super intense. And yeah. So you've chosen to go public.
mhm,
You've said that you did start to try and, open your daughter's eyes, or talk to her about some of the truth of what was going on, and that went badly, and she's been moved away. And after that, you've made a choice to go a bit more public about the group and about um, being a parent, a concerned parent about this. That's often a really difficult decision for people to make around, yeah, do you keep quiet and don't antagonize the group or rock the boat? Do you keep quiet in the hopes of having this kind of carrot held out to you of relationship? Because often these groups do hold out that as a bit of a carrot, don't speak against us, and we might let you see your loved one.
yeah,
Or, yeah, there's the choice to speak up, perhaps do a bit of activism about around the group, and then you know that if you do that, you're most likely going to be viewed, you're going to be demonized by the group and probably by your family member on the inside.
mhm.
So it's a really hard thing for people to choose between which one which path they're going to take. Was that something you've had to navigate?
Absolutely. And I think my decision to go down the path I have actually stems back to the relationship I had with my daughter was always one that was based on openness and authenticity.
Mm,
And so when I did actually eventually confront her, part of my thinking was, I can see what you're in. I can see you're in a cult. If
mm,
I just keep up this, what felt like me being fake in supporting her at that point,
mm,
once I knew enough, I'm like, you are going to hate me for never speaking up. And
yeah.
so that was the challenge I had to sort of face. It's like, do I continue to honor that real relationship I have with my daughter, or do I
Mm,
go down this this line of this pretend support, really? Because it would have been pretend support. And I
mm,
don't, I can't be that inauthentic.
yeah.
Ultimately, I don't think my daughter would respect me being that inauthentic.
Mm,
And it's not necessarily going to work because by this stage, by the time I went public, I had made contact with other families who had lost members to this group and things like that. And some of the feedback I sort of got collectively from all of that was, if I, played it nice and I wasn't nasty to the cult leader, then I could still have some sort of connection with my daughter, but it was not going to be a real one. And I literally saw that. And it's just damned if you do, damned if you don't.
yes, yes.
It was
I
just
yeah.
constantly, it was just damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Mm,
And ultimately, I'm just looking at this group and all of these behaviors, and I'm going, this isn't allowed in domestic settings. This isn't allowed in business.
yeah.
This isn't allowed in all of these things.
Mm.
And I, it just
Well,
makes me angry. It's like,
yeah.
no,
Well,
we've got to stop this.
yeah, and I think one of the incredibly challenging things is that if you don't speak up, um, you can feel that the group, even though you're not a member of the group is then controlling you and
Yes.
having the ability to silence you and force you to compromise your integrity and
Mhm.
your authenticity. I know I've wrestled with this myself, but with, the shoe on the other foot kind of thing of being a former member of a group. And for me, trying to maintain or have any relationship with those on the inside and struggling with, very similar things. And eventually realizing, after many years of choosing to be silent at the hopes of relationship, realizing, my goodness, I'm not part of this group, and yet their reach is enveloping me as well, and I'm being
Absolutely.
controlled and silenced, even though I'm not a member. And it sounds like
Absolutely.
you've had to navigate that as a parent, which is even
Mhm.
more horrific because you were never even part of this group, and it,
That's it.
you don't want it at all. That's just that is just so very challenging.
Mm.
So um so you have spoken up, and yeah, what effect has that had, Renee, on your relationship with your daughter?
Oh, what the relationship was effectively stopped because of what the cult leader was doing. So over the years, things I've done, I have actually taken the cult leader to court over defamation.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a whole story in itself. And
Oh,
that's sort of,
you're a battler.
oh, look, it's just like, how dare he? How dare he actually say these things about me? And he has
Right.
gotten away with it. So, yeah, look, there's probably a whole great big story there, which is probably too much to
We'll
unpack
have to
right
have
now.
we'll have to have you back on the show to hear a bit more about that because that sounds, yeah, really intense and no doubt lots of complex layers to that there. Yeah.
Absolutely. So lots in that. And through it was at pretty much through the court process that then led to a documentary happening. And I got to see my daughter through the documentary and seeing her in person, like the connection's there. But then because I'm only allowed to email her, that's the only contact I'm allowed to have, and the cult leader just has total control over that, uh, then that just got cut off again.
Right.
Um,
So
and
currently speaking, you're still estranged from one another.
yeah,
Mm,
yeah. And as far as I know, she is in Mexico.
man. Yeah.
And yeah, in the whole mix of all the stories, like I said, she married just after she joined. She broke up with her husband 7 months later. They were separated for 18 months, and then she's been back with him for the last few years. So there's just lots of things that have been going on.
Lots of complex layers. Yeah. Well, Renee, thank you for coming on and giving us this brief overview of something that's really hard and really complex. And I definitely would love to have you back to talk more about
Yeah.
this. I've got one last question before we'll wrap up, and that's on the controversial topic of sometimes what's called deprogramming or interventions,
Yeah.
which is, there's kind of a bit of a scale of how people
Mm.
do it, but historically, sometimes concerned
Mm.
parents would bring in a third party to kind of effectively kidnap their child and take them out and take them away to kind of
Mm.
deprogramming camp or back to the family, to try and like
Mm.
shake them out of where they are, or sometimes
Mm.
even just meet their physical needs, because sometimes they might be having a lack of sleep or a lack of food, and so trying to kind of do an emergency rescue,
Mm.
or there's you know the less intense end of that scale is doing interventions where, yeah, a third party is brought in to try to talk to the person or to try and essentially mediate with the young person or the recruit and their family members. Have you got any quick thoughts on those things? Have you tried anything like that?
No, I've never tried anything like that. It is, if we would compare it again to domestic violence, I've always understood that if someone's in abusive relationship, you can be there and you can support them, and you can even say, hey, this relationship's not great, but it's not until they're ready to leave that you can really help them. And yeah, again, there is so many tangents that could be gone off on looking at that whole history, the whole history of cults and how that's interweaved with all of that deprogramming, and now it's called exit counseling and stuff like that. Uh,
Yes.
from my personal experience as a mental health practitioner, I just view things mainly through a trauma-informed lens.
Mm.
So when someone, and hopefully this will happen with my daughter at some stage, she needs just a trauma-informed approach. And that sort of relates back to just acknowledging that she's been in a situation where she's had a lot of fear installed in her. And so her amygdala would be going off, and prefrontal cortex not working like it's meant to, and things like that. So
So having a very your concern with exit counselling or interventions is that sometimes it may be too directive and not sensitive enough to the traumas that a recruit might be carrying.
look, I probably don't know enough about that side of things,
Mm.
because I've consciously not gone down that path,
Yeah.
and I've
So for
heard other
your,
people's stories.
for your situation, you feel it hasn't been the right pathway for your child.
No, no, look, I've never once even contemplated, okay, I've got to steal her and do this or do that. It's like, no. Again, it's always just been, what is the integrity of my relationship with my child? And if I was to do something like that, again, I would be breaking the integrity of my child, which is where I guess I've just tried to be open and honest and tell the truth of the situation from my point of view. And maybe it's idealistic of me, but I think eventually the truth is what is supposed to set everyone free.
Yeah, that is so true. So, yeah, well, Renee, we are definitely hoping with you that ultimately truth will win out for you and for your daughter and for everybody who's been recruited into this group, because they do sound like they are incredibly cult-like and coercive and controlling and really dangerous. So yeah, so we're standing with you and definitely wish you all the best, continued courage for your fight. And yeah, maybe we'll have you and your daughter back one day on
Yes, let's
Culture.
put that out there. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, thank you for coming and joining us on Cult Chat. And yeah, we will be in touch with you.
Okay. Thank you, Lindy.
Welcome back. It's that was such a fabulous conversation, Lindy. What did you think about it, Liz?
Yeah, I thought it was amazing, and what a brave lady, and what a devastating sort of story.
It is.
Because you can see the patience that's now needed for this mum to, potentially try to reach her family member. So I think this episode's going to be, a really important discussion. And actually, I get phone calls from people around New Zealand who are saying this exact thing: help, my child is in a cult. What do I do? And it's a really difficult conversation because there is no mystical, magical, quick solution to this problem.
She had such faithfulness in her approach to trying to find a way to navigate this ongoing, authentic relationship with her daughter. That's what she talked about. She talked about this idea of trying to be true to the relationship she had before her daughter left the group. But actually, in fairness, without any information. Like she talked about not really knowing much about the group until she had been in the group for 2 years.
Yeah, that she found out the name only 2 years later.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to imagine that kind of fumbling through the darkness, knowing something really is very wrong. And the relationship has been really severed. And increasingly so, it sounds like. Yet still trying to do right with the knowledge that your actions in these moments, in these interactions, could be making it worse. Maybe making it better, who knows? Like no manual for this.
Yeah, I think it's really complicated. It's really hard on family members losing a loved one into a culty group. And I think, one of the other things that's, in terms of setting a context, is important as I'm thinking of the wide variety of different viewers and listeners that we might have. It is worth saying that there is a spectrum. As you said at the beginning of this episode today, we're trying to focus on what it's like to be someone who has never been part of a group, who's not a recruit or a former member themselves, but a family member or a loved one has gone in. And there can be a spectrum of relationship here, like how deep is the divide is a question. And because some people, their loved one might have joined a culty group and is beginning to have maybe some strange practices or believe a few things that you don't believe, but you can still have family Christmas together, you can still have them over for a meal, you can still, they're still your Facebook friend. Whereas what Renee was talking about is at the extreme end of the spectrum. She didn't actually share it this time, but I've heard her publicly elsewhere describe how actually all forms of communication with her daughter were cut off, and at one stage she thought she was having email contact with her daughter, and later she discovered that it wasn't her daughter at all replying to the emails. It was somebody else in the group who was masquerading as her daughter and responding. And so I think that changes the question as well, with this question of how do we communicate with loved ones inside a culty group. One of the first questions is establishing just how deep is the divide. Is there any form of communication at all? Because, that's one of the first pieces really, is to figure out how deep is the divide. Are you talking about trying to cross the Grand Canyon here, or are you talking about an ankle deep stream? So
And unfortunately, it takes some time to figure that out.
that's true. Yeah,
Meanwhile, your loved one is more and more
possibly getting more and
indoctrinated.
more.
Falling away, you're feeling a distance.
And you don't have the information.
Someone
and you're
else
being misled.
Has got their fishing rod out and luring them in. And didn't she say how quickly she was pulled in?
Yes, and getting married and all that
married
sort of thing. Like
within-
those are massive steps to increase the divide before you've hardly even had time to recognise what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that there was a documentary called The Dark Reality of the Kidney Cult that 7 News Spotlight series in Australia did on this very story. And Renee referenced that through the conversation. And I find it interesting because I watched it and the documentarians actually tried to bring her and her daughter together. And you see the two coming together, heavily monitored by the cult leader and the other cult members, and it was just such a raw emotional meeting, yet there were all these people there who did not belong there, trying to ultimately make sure that she doesn't get that this meeting, this connection occurs absolutely as it should be according to the cult leader's agenda.
Well, the cults like to have a public persona. And they love to promote themselves as not being harmful groups at all. And of course we don't prevent people from having contact with family members. So let's stage a doco where the daughter and the mother get together and we all look, we can see through this. But I don't know why the cults think we can't. But you know what that does is must have created huge confusion in her daughter's mind because there would have been this emotion and her mother is trying to meet her on that emotional plane on the fact that they've had an authentic connection. The difficulty is the daughter had her pre-cult identity and you may have had a good emotional connection, but this person has taken on a post-cult identity and that has occurred to her. And so the young lady must have been grappling with which world was she living in when that reunion occurred on camera.
Yeah, and it's testing all of these groups, what I think the other key question the other key thing to hold in your mind when you're communicating with people in a culty group is that it's no longer just you and the family member communicating anymore. There is a third party present, even if they're not physically present. They're physically, mentally and emotionally present in the recruit's mind. There is immediately and always a very real presence of a third party, which is the culty group, plural, and their values and beliefs and practices, or it takes a more tangible form of the cult leader. I think of a story that I've heard before of a woman who was involved with a leader in the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, and she had a ring on her finger which had one big stone in the middle and 2 smaller stones on either side, and she said to a friend of mine in the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, she said, the leader is the middle rock and me and my husband are the rock on either side, which was a really tangible expression of what I'm trying to describe, that, no longer anymore is it you and your spouse or you and your child or you and your sibling. It is you, then it is the group leader or the group itself, and everything is mediated through that group identity, through that cult identity now. And so that really changes it. And my heart broke for Renee because you could see that she was still longing for and holding on to the previous connection and quality relationship she had with her daughter, and yet she's just coming up against this wall of the cult identity that this person has taken on board.
And cults sever family bonds. That's one of their great features.
Yeah,
That's
they
how
insert themselves as the primary attachment instead of the family bond.
And so she has done the right thing in trying to keep a connection. In fact, all the recovery books we talk about the need to maintain contact if at all possible, and if it's positive contact, then that's a good thing to pursue that if if possible.
can,
but
yeah.
often it's on the group's terms. But there are often creative ways that you think of a group even like Glorabelle, very closed. It was incredible the lengths that people have gone to over the years to keep connected and bond with family members.
Right, like sneaking in the dark to try and
Yes,
see
and
somebody. And
they will mainly be, that's probably our next part 2 of our episode, they're people who were born there, although in the Glorabelle context, some of those first generation who joined at 18, 19, 20 were pulled away, separated from their family, some who were international, their families lived overseas. There are stories where those parents came and were welcome to come and stay at the community and stay and have a holiday and visit. And one woman recently told me that her dad, once he did that, he felt so much better about her involvement in the group because, of course, they got given the grand tour and the glossy view. Even Hopeful Christian's mum used to come and stay there, and in her older years lived at the community.
Yeah. I've got a friend who's a family member was in a highly controlling group, and she tells me about how they'd often go and visit and stay there for a week at a time and be part of the community and the culture of the group, and knowing that it wasn't right. Yeah. But
it kept a family bond.
Yes, it was what.
But only the loyal people were actually allowed those privileges. They would never let some of the lower members, family members come and stay, and especially no one that was going to create a difficulty for them. And that's what I appreciated about Renee. She realised and she spoke out against this group, even taking the cult leader to court. What a story. She did that knowing that it might actually further sever the relationship with her daughter, because when you speak out, what do you become?
Yeah, wow.
Exclusive brethren call you.
You become a hated object for them because you're then a threat to them. You're not just a threat to the individual that you're trying to maybe get back or to have some connection with, but you're a threat to the very organisation. So for the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, they have a special title for people who are a threat to their organisation, and that's called opposers, or the Jehovah's Witness call them apostates. Nearly every group has a name for these specific people who are a threat to the organisation. And if you choose to become, if you choose to speak up about them or to become one of these, significant threats, then unfortunately that also means that communication with you is even more stridently discouraged or controlled or managed.
Can I read a quote at this point?
Yeah.
This quote is from Liz Cameron. She's just recently authored a book called Cult Bride. I haven't read it yet, but I'm hearing extremely good reports about it, so maybe consider reading that yourself. And she was recently interviewed on Let's Talk About Sects. Sarah Steele is a colleague and a friend of ours, and she does an extremely good podcast. And Liz on her podcast said, and this was only a few months ago, she was recently Liz was in the Providence cult, which is a Korean spin-off cult in Australia, I think. So she said, "This is what I tell a lot of people who reach out to me with a family member in a cult, which is, do not try and appeal to their common sense. Don't try and appeal to their critical reasoning, because they exist in a completely different plane to you of logic. So your child, your loved one, might be incredibly smart, but that doesn't matter if they're indoctrinated. They're not going to see things through your eyes because they believe they have the higher truth than you. And ultimately, what happens if you question them or you try and have what you think is a rational conversation? They will take it as an attack. And so you have to be very careful not to trigger that internal alarm system where they have been conditioned to say, you're being satanic, Satan's using you, or trying to make me doubt, and basically telling the leadership, which makes them go, your parent or your loved one is dangerous. You shouldn't be talking to them because they're just going to be a bad influence on you, and they're going to be dangerous to your faith. Dangerous. That's what the loved one becomes.
So that
dangerous.
That perfectly launches off what I was saying, that you then become more of a threat if you're viewed as a threat or a danger to the individual or the organisation. Then it means that they're going to distance themselves even more from you and try to minimise or control that communication. And yet, as Renee described, for those on the outside, you're absolutely trapped between a rock and a hard place, because do you hide your own integrity and deep concern about the well-being of your child or the group, do you hide all of that just to try and be this benign, neutral person in the hopes of keeping some more communication open? But then you're not being honest about your concerns, you know?
Oh, it's terrible,
I think
isn't it?
it matters, you know, how wide is the divide? What kind of group? Is this person just on the fringy edge? Are they right now in the centre? How many years have gone past since they've been in there? There are a lot of factors at play. There hasn't been a lot of understanding of this kind of thing, particularly Australia, New Zealand. We actually don't have resources at our fingertips for this. But, you know, America, there's actually been quite a bit of work done on, you know, what they call intervention strategies. You brought it up with Renee. There are, you know,
there's a decades-long history of particularly in America, of parents freaking out because their kid has been sucked into a cult, and so there is a history there of different things that people have tried over the years. And I think originally it hasn't been done for a long time now because it's ethically very questionable around not respecting a person's autonomy. But yeah, they did used to do this kind of effectively a kidnapping thing where they'd sneak in there and grab someone out forcibly.
Keep them in a cabin for a week while they did deprogramming.
Showed them
But let's
deprogramming
be
videos.
realistic here. In New Zealand, and I'm not sure about Australia, but I think it might certainly the case in New Zealand, we don't have experts
Who can
do this work. And there's no funding for the psychological or interventional support to get someone out of a cult. And if you're flying someone from America, you're looking at a 50 grand sort of price tag. So for the average person, that is not an option.
A good option.
It's not an option. But so how about we talk about some of the ideas that might be helpful to for anyone who is trying?
Well, I think you can still look at not the kidnapping style, but the family intervention information that's out there. Even if you can't pay for someone to come and do the family planning for 3 to 5 days that they like to do, because they say that to get someone out of a cult, perhaps that shouldn't be your aim. Your aim should be to restore connection with that person and put the information in front of them that you think maybe they don't have, and that you can train the family. But part of that involves them learning about what are cults, what are the recruitment techniques, what is this group about, get all your research on that, and what does recovery look like. So it's actually around informing the whole family around what it actually means for your loved one to have gone in the group.
Psychoeducation, really.
Absolutely. And then they would offer 3 to 5 days if they wanted to go ahead with an intervention, but in a non-coercive way. But you're right. What goes on in that time is presenting of the information about the group, but also cult tactics, how they recruit, putting that information in front of the person who's involved with the cult.
So it's essentially a form of family mediation.
It is.
But what we're saying is you need these specialised areas of understanding of how these groups work.
So even though we might not be able to have the specialists come and have the money to afford, to pay for someone else to do that, I think that the understanding is vital for the family member. The responsibility falls squarely on them, probably in our New Zealand context, to educate themselves on it.
So there's the two things. Let's just talk about them. The one thing is understanding
What
cult
you're dealing with.
indoctrination.
That's right.
What are lucky there's this great podcast you can listen to that talks about cult playbooks and the things they do. So that is really critical, that overview understanding of the actual specific harm that has happened, sort of a generic specific harm, like generic specific. Well, then there's that, and then there's what has happened in this group.
So there's a lot of work to be done for a family member who wants, because you can just stumble and make some pretty dramatic errors, but you're doing it in the kindest way. Things that you shouldn't be looking to say to these people, like,
did you know it was a cult?
Yeah, like you're in a cult,
and you're not thinking for yourself, and you've been brainwashed. And actually, these things are absolutely true, but that's not the approach that one should be taking. With
if we think of Liz Cameron's comment about,
as Liz said, it brings up, what was it, a defensive? It's perceived as an attack.
Perceived as an attack, and you're triggering their internal alarm system where they're conditioned to say you're being satanic. Yeah. So you don't, and so there was some comments. I would recommend Steve Hassan's book, Combating Cult Mind Control. He's got a whole chapter about a stepwise approach to developing a relationship and building it up and getting the information you need to start to approach someone inside a cult, remembering they're not all behind the walls of Gloriavale. You know, some people are floating around the edges or getting closer and closer to the edges, to the centre of groups that, yes, that's the book, Combating Cult Mind Control. And he talks about what we've already said, some of the stuff we've already said, goal-orientated communication, putting the person in touch with their real identity, anchoring them to a time before the cult, to a positive reference point that they might remember or they can imagine if they didn't have any good experiences.
Reminding themselves of the good experiences that you shared, the things they were good at,
Who they were,
that you used to play piano, and is this something, you know, you get any joy in anymore?
And you used to want to be a
vet or
yes,
I've noticed you're not, you know, pursuing that. Is you know, do you have changed goals now?
yes, which is pretty tricky if you're talking to a born and raised person. So that's where imagination comes in, you know, like, what have you ever thought of things that you would have liked to have done? You know, part of yourself you like to explore. And then and another thing he said, because we're not going to spend, we're having to wrap up soon, is the idea of sidestepping some of the problems about the cult so that you don't trigger that internal alarm system. Like you were talking about earlier to me about the showing the Moonies video, what the Moonies do to recruit members, and that might be more palatable than telling someone in Gloriavale what Gloriavale does.
That's right. And so I think the key thing is there's a lot of information out there, but unfortunately we can't really point you to people in New Zealand with this expertise. But go and look up in particular Carol Giambalvo, and she's done a lot of excellent work in cult-related family intervention processes.
Do you want to spell her name?
I can. It's Carol, and then it's Giambalvo, and a lot of excellent, like step by step, if we were to do an intervention family, this is what it would look like. It is a brilliant piece of work. She then wrote a book about exit counselling, and also called Thought Reform Counselling, but it really does rely on the family members taking it on themselves to learn. And yeah, I've had mums ringing, and one's been following along regularly with our work with Gloriavale and saying how it's kept her alive, because she just thought it could be quite a quick process of getting a child out.
You're talking about a non-Gloriavale mother,
yes,
but who's got a child in a completely different group.
They're ringing us saying, what do we do? And all I can do is point to this research and say it's a really slow process, and I'm sorry, but there might be some steps forward and some devastations. And she's rung me really excited about some positive things that happened that she never believed would. And then she's rung when
the door's been shut.
The door's been shut again. And all I can say is it's okay, that's to be expected, and there's patience required. So she's going all out, but she's at the difficult spot. Do I speak out about the group now? Because I want to do more for the wider problem, not just my son.
Absolutely. So a final resource I really have to draw your attention to is the International Cultic Studies Association website. And a lot of this early work came from the people who are still fairly significant players in that organisation in Australia. I'll be going to their conference in 3 or 4 weeks.
America.
In America. Sorry, did I say Australia? America. And their website is filled with content. So if you don't know where to start, start there. International Cultic Studies Association, ICSA, ICSA. Lots of resources, lots of content. These are a collection of many of the world leaders in this area.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it must be a devastating thing. So thanks, Lindy, for spending that time with Renee and reminding us of the difficulties, and that parents shouldn't just give their children away. They have some agency in this. They can participate in an attempt to, you know, restore that connection, and it's worth it. And one day, Renee's daughter will leave that group. It's very likely she will. And I know that when she comes out, she will say to her mum, thank you for remaining in contact. Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for trying to remind me of who I was.
Because actually I've noticed that the people who do the best seem to be the people who've got somewhere to land.
Yes.
So we need to create more places that people can land when they are ready to come out.
And then after that, there's a whole post-cult recovery process. It's not an easy, we just go back to the way we were before. So we need to remember that too. So hopefully you'll keep listening to Cult Chat. You'll be encouraged by the amount of research and progress that's occurring, even just across the worldwide wave of understanding and cultic issues. Like us, share us around your platforms, and thanks again to Plains Media for deeming us suitable to be on air across the airwaves of New Zealand. Thanks everyone.
Ka kite anō. See you later. If anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.